I appreciate you, sir. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of The Rundown. I'm Jeff. You know Alan, and you probably recognize all these fine fellas from last week's virtual workshop. From Team Opto, we've got Benson, Terry, and Ben. Hey, guys.
Hey, Jeff, how's it going?
I am well, thank you. Just got through Halloween trick or treat, and we did something fun. Integrate Live sponsored the trick or treat at Laurel Circle over here in Northwest Arkansas. We gave out king size candy bars, but only if the kids gave me a dad joke.
Oh,
yeah.
How did it actually go? Because my assumption was that on the spot, a 5-year-old's not going to be able to deliver a dad joke, but I could be wrong.
Okay. What do you get when you cross a chicken and a fox?
Chicken fox.
Cluck, cluck, fox face. That might have been the highlight of the night. No, I did. I got a good one. But first, to our Phoenix contact guys. Hey, Steve. Hey, Dave. Thank you. Somebody's missing. Who's missing?
Ira.
Yeah, Ira's playing golf in Palm Springs or something as part of a work trip. So we've lost him. One of the better jokes of the night, Halloween themed. Why did the ghost take the elevator? He needed to lift his spirits.
That was one of the best ones.
Yeah, they weren't all great.
Did you get the one that the famous why did Terry go in the bathroom?
No,
because he was looking for poo.
Oh no, I didn't.
No, you didn't get that one.
I did not. I got one from a 6th grader that made both me and his dad blush.
Oh my!
That's not going to get repeated.
Right? Are we on tape delay here so we can?
Yeah. Check your chat. All right. Well, hey, listen. Let's talk about last week. Great project. I thought everything went well. Watching it back a few times this week and starting to grab some clips from it. There were some really good talking points, and I just thought the project flowed well from being able to follow it standpoint. So congratulations, guys. I think you did a great job on that. But there was a term that came up that I don't know, maybe confusing, maybe not confusing, depending on who you are and what your background is. But it was on this slide. I thought we'd kick off here. Ira gave us a report that Microsoft and Intel put out that basically said 45% of companies have proof of concepts using soft PLCs. Benson, will you tackle that maybe a little bit for us from this concept of what is a soft PLC and what?
Sure.
Yeah, let's get you over here, Benson. All right,
putting me on the main stage, huh?
Put you on the main page. Put you on the spot. What's the soft PLC? What do we need to know about it?
Well, there's quite a history behind the notion of a soft PLC, and in short, it's this notion of a PLC runtime engine that could potentially run on different targets. And what's a target? A target's a piece of hardware. And if you look historically at the history of PLCs, generally that runtime engine, that piece of code that runs on a given piece of hardware, is very, very tightly coupled. Indeed, if you look at the world today, generally speaking, if I want to go out and buy a PLC, I'm buying everything. I'm buying the hardware, I'm buying the software. I'm completely locked into those two things working together. That means I'm also locked into whatever support's provided, whatever training is provided, and so on. I mean, it's akin somewhat to going to a poker game, and every time you place a bet, you go all in. That's essentially what we're dealing with today. So the notion of a soft PLC came out in the, as I recall, late 80s, early 90s. And it was this idea that, well, what if we could take the runtime engine and make it separate from the hardware, but could run on given hardware targets? And indeed, this is essentially what there was actually a company called Soft PLC that did this. And they were focused back then on the Windows operating system with some degree of real-time extensions that, in my opinion, never really worked that well. That said, there was a lot of people that were very interested in the notion of a soft PLC. Indeed, probably one of the most largest companies that was interested in this and funded some of that development was none other than General Motors. Again, for the same reason that they felt locked into a given PLC platform based on a given PLC programming environment. So that while that started to gain some ground, it never really, I would say, hit its stride. Today, we've got companies like 3S Software, which of course develops the CodeSys runtime. And indeed, what they did was take the notion of a hard real-time PLC engine and literally ported it to given targets that they knew they could get the performance that you would expect out of a so-called soft PLC. And that's really what CodeSys business model is. They develop software and runtime engines that are tied directly to some given piece of hardware, say an ARM32 or an ARM64, or perhaps some x86, which to all the rest of us, that's a typical PC, typical Windows PC. So that's kind of what we embrace as well. We had our own control engine, we still do, that we've been running since the late 80s on a 32-bit processor in 1989. A 68020, no less. This is a Motorola processor that was predominantly used in Macintosh computers back in the day. And we developed our so-called soft PLC to run on that hardware platform, somewhat tightly coupled. But today, with today's operating systems, today's hardware, there's so much performance. There's so much available RAM, so much available raw CPU power that now some of the problems we had with the notion of soft PLC back 2-3 decades ago no longer exist. And with real-time extensions, Preempt RT, available for the Linux OS, we can tie a thread, in our case, a quad-core processor, we can tie a real-time thread to that control engine. So we will get that kind of performance you would expect out of a tightly coupled hard real-time PLC with its runtime engine. So kind of a long explanation, but I think one of the benefits, what I think the industry can benefit from in this notion is what we're trying to provide with Epic and Phoenix is offering with the PLC Next platform. And that is something we've never had before. It's choice. It's picking the right tool for the right job. So indeed, we have our own pack control runtime engine. We've got CodeSys. You choose what's best for your application. What are you trying to accomplish? And indeed, there are times when you want to accomplish other tasks that are outside of what you might traditionally do in a PLC program. A lot of times we could, last week we talked about reaching out to web service APIs. Terrific. Could you do that with CodeSys? Could you do that with Pack Control? Could you do that with PLC Next Engineer? Absolutely. But is it the right tool for the job? That's the question we all have to answer for ourselves. So at the end of the day, this notion of soft PLCs or a PLC runtime engine running on a given piece of hardware comes down to choice.
Okay. Dave, anything on your side that you'd add?
He did a pretty comprehensive job, but I do have a few personal recollections on the whole concept of soft PLC. I was working for Eaton Corporation back in the day when it was really starting off in the 90s. We actually were name branding Steeplechase software, which is out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we had the thought that, hey, we weren't really known at Eaton for having PLCs. There were certain incumbents in the market that were dominant. And we thought that, hey, this is our chance to leapfrog and get into control in a real way on the factory floor vis-a-vis a PC running a soft PLC, which was name branded version of Steeplechase. Because the thought was you got all this horsepower in a computer. They're going to run an HMI program also, which has to be on a computer. So now you can just get rid of that box that they call a PLC and do it all in the one piece of hardware. And it kind of took off a little bit at the beginning for some early adopters, but it really stalled in its tracks back then. But I think it spoke to a hunger, like Benson referenced, from the automotive field as well as others, that they were tired of being locked in. And they were looking for solutions like that. And I think what undid it back in the day was that when you bought a traditional PLC back then, and even up through now, you get a dedicated piece of hardware / software that is going to be reliable and rock solid. It's going to do what it's going to do. It's not going to do much more beyond that, but you can get it, whether you get it like 4 years ago or yesterday, it's going to be the same, operate the same predictably. And that's really what you want in an automation and control system, is predictability and determinism and all that kind of stuff. So when you try to take a soft PLC back in that era, stick it onto, say, a Dell PC or any other brand of PC, and they change their BIOS one week to the next, and all of a sudden everything's not working quite the same way, and the drivers aren't working the way you expect them to, and there's all this troubleshooting. That's, in my opinion, what kind of undid that whole concept. So I think the real need of openness and yearning to do more than what the PLC could do is still there and has been all along. And I think it's only now that we're finally starting to realize that with companies like Opto and ourselves with PLC Next. It's like, okay, we do have this huge Industry 4.0 in front of us. We do have a lot of this whole internet and all this innovation that's happening in the IT fields. Let's finally harness that, but do so in a way that is predictable, reliable, repeatable, deterministic, all that kind of stuff that a traditional PLC hardware would give you. So it's finally, I think, the realization of what people have been yearning for like a generation.
I will say this. So from an end user standpoint, that has a lot of weight on the cybersecurity specifically. There's two words in that slide that make me uncomfortable. One is open, and two is soft. And so when I think about the Opto 22 Epic Groove, or even the Rio, or the next PLC from Phoenix, for me, that's a next gen PLC. That's a piece of hardware that's resilient, that has all the OT pieces that we need in the OT space, right? It's resilient. It's going to get you exceptional uptime. You can do redundancy. You can do all the things you can typically do in the OT space with the PLC, but it incorporates those really key factors from IT embedded into that PLC that allow you to do really move into that Industry 4.0 path, but do it securely, right? So you can lock down what talks to what. You can segment out those different NICs. You can start to do outbound only. You can do LDAP. You can do all these different security features that are necessary for cybersecurity, but now you can start to do that in a single piece of hardware that also has all those necessary components as a PLC.
So, Alan, as an end user, what was your evaluation process on trying to decide, like, okay, hey, it's time to buy a PLC. Like, we need to buy a dozen PLCs. Was there some type of evaluation that you'd go through that would
kind of... You want my evaluation, or do you want what I have lived through every single time I've had to do an evaluation of a PLC?
Let's start with the latter and then give me yours.
All right. So every time I have gone through the process of evaluating the PLC, what always wins at the end of the day has nothing to do with technical. It's always culture. It's always typically your technicians are branded, right? They have this manufacturer that they like, or they have this one they like. And so and I'm not going to point out anyone, but just to say brand A, right, it's what they use. And let me just say this, there's good reason for that. And a lot of it has to do back with what Benson was saying, right? So let's say you love the Allen Bradley product, and you have done years and years of training your technicians. You've done years of creating standards and templates and UDTs that you're going to continue to use over and over again. And then if you're going to bring another product in, well, you have to start from scratch. So it's not just, oh yeah, this product is X amount of dollars less than this product. But then when you actually look at what it's going to cost to implement and do it well, you're going to far exceed the cost of just going and buying another product. And that's a valid discussion, and it's needed, right? Here's where we typically fall off the cliff, though. Where we fall off the cliff is in two areas, in cybersecurity and in total cost of ownership. Because what we're not considering is, one, what is the cost of continuing to put in hardware that can't meet those basic standards for cybersecurity? And then what is the cost going on of for instance, if let's just take what a lot of us in the industry have lived through, right? You've gone from a PLC 5 to control logics. Well, guess what? You got to rewrite your code. You have to go through that whole process anyway. And not saying that that's going to happen again, but eventually it will happen.
Yeah.
And you have to go through that process again. So the last time that I went through this, it was we took a very hard look at code assist, and we wanted to use code assist for the purpose of, let's go ahead and build templates, let's build our standards, let's do all this heavy lifting, but get it into a product that can be leveraged with any hardware that accepts code assist. So now I get to keep my IP, right? Now I'm not locked into a brand. And we spent years really, really taking a run at doing that. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, I think that for the company that I was working with and the culture and just we never could get it over the hump. We got really close, I think closer than I think we could have, or we thought we would, but we just couldn't get there. It's hard, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? What's your experience been walking customers through that same journey?
Yeah, there's. Let me come back to, and I spent a lot of time with Alan, getting that feedback from Alan as an end user and what his needs and desires were in the field, and a lot of that was around this notion of cybersecurity, and it's a critical element. We've been at this for almost 50 years. And we're always taking feedback from the field about what we can do to make the product better, to address new challenges that might be in an industrial automation application. And in each of those cases, you take this list of what people are looking for or what problem they're trying to solve, and then you toss it over to engineering and you say, hey, we need to do this, right? So what you've done is you've basically taken your core engineering group and saying, hey, listen, we need to address this need. Or this particular type of technology or this use case. And that's a finite group. And so when we start talking about this notion of open PLCs or having different targets and different software running on it, what it allows us to do is leverage other work that's been done. And I'm specifically talking about, in this case, cybersecurity. We could write into our control program all the cybersecurity features that a given application would need, including Alan's. But indeed, that's a pretty heavy lift, all being done by our engineers. What if we could leverage other work that's been done? I'm going to go back 25 years with this notion of Ethernet. Why are we developing 8 different field buses and putting them all under an IEC umbrella and say, the beauty of standards is there's lots to choose from? Why does that make sense? Why can't we leverage a bus architecture, a wire that could, essentially baseline how we move data across wire, but allow many protocols to run on it? And that was Ethernet. We're seeing the same thing now with things like cybersecurity and things like digital transformation, industry 4.0 type applications. Or how can we leverage some of that? Today, both us, Opto and Phoenix, have embraced the notion of Linux. Why Linux? Linux is an operating system today that runs on more servers than any other OS out there. And to do that, especially on the internet, it has to be secure. So indeed, there's a lot of embedded technology already in Linux ripe for the picking to put into a PLC and leverage that technology while we focus on what it is we do best or what Phoenix does best. And put all those together to achieve the desired solution. So I think that's an important aspect, is we can't all do it all ourselves. We've got to figure out how we can leverage some of these other technologies. And indeed on Linux, the notion of having this embedded firewall, of doing TLS certificates, of creating accounts, whether they're local or centrally managed like LDAP, all of these features and tools we're actually able to pull from the open source community and provide that benefit to our users without us developing it all. ourselves.
I think that's a great parallel with the industrial Ethernet. I remember back in the day, Ethernet will never make it on the factory floor.
Right.
It's not
Right.
deterministic and this reason and that reason. And when you got something with that much horsepower behind it from the general public and society, it becomes pervasive, and why fight it? So that's why we see everything over Ethernet now on the factory floor, whether it's, Profinet or Ethernet IP or whatever the protocol might be that's running over it. And same thing with Linux and a lot of these other macro trends, as I'd call them, that come from the IoT. They're so big, and I think the smarter companies and the winning strategy is going to be, let's harness those mega trends instead of fighting them. See what applies and make sure they're relevant to the industrial world, and keep those which are, and don't bother with the ones that are not. But then focus really in on what's core to you as a company that makes, why is it that we make a better PLC than somebody else might? Because focus on those things, keep your engineers focused on those narrow tasks rather than the more vanilla generic tasks that can be done better by the open source community. So I think that's the winning strategy going forward. And I think it's going to take a little bit of lag time, just like Ethernet did, but eventually it'll get there.
Agreed.
That's why the EPIC zero base, just the processor, right? So the reason that I worked so hard and long with Benson to make sure that thing was fit for what we needed as a company, the last company I was working for, was because we will never actually manage to take care of the legacy PLCs we have in our systems, right? We have thousands and thousands of these things, and just addressing one medium-sized one, you're still talking in the millions of dollars to be able to rip and replace and put in something that is secure. And even then, you're having to play these games with the PLC hardware on the market today that, I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but the point I'm trying to make is, what is a path that we can actually bring cybersecurity to a legacy PLC? And so for me, it was, I want a device that I can put in a PLC panel that will allow me to segment off of that legacy PLC onto its own network, not accessible by anybody other than if you have to literally break the lock off the panel and plug into it. Other than that, you can't get to it. And then to be able to leverage that to not just, now we're secure, but now we get to use a pub sub MQTT. Well, so now I'm decoupling my hardware from my actual HMI, right? And so, I think ultimately there's these tools that we have access to now today. It's still the difficulty of, great, I can go out and buy a complete PLC Next PLC. It's going to be next gen. I'm going to be able to put a firewall in it. It's going to be able to make it secure, all these different things. But now I got to figure out, how am I going to rip out this old legacy PLC and get this one in. And it's a journey. It's going to be we all have been fighting it for years, and we'll continue to fight it. So.
And Alan, I think you just hit on something that's really important to the discussion. I think this is what Ira is driving towards with the open PLC comment that he threw up there. And I think that's the decoupling of the PLC. Well, I think it's kind of breaking down the old Purdue model of, a sensor layer, PLC layer, SCADA layer, MR, but all the way up to the top. And now it's, if you can have something like MQTT and a broker, and then have pub sub going on, now it's a lot easier to get information from point A to anywhere else in that organization, and do so securely. And I think that's a really key consideration in this whole discussion. And that's, I think, this kind of what we illustrated in last week's virtual workshop, is how these things can all of a sudden, disparate points of data that would have been very difficult to integrate across the way it was done in the old days, it was very easy to do with a broker and MQTT.
Well, now take that to the next level, right? So take that to an architectural level of saying, okay, I've got a, let's say we got a water plant, and the water plant has, 550 IO points, and you've got this giant cabinet with the old PLC and rack after rack of IO. Well, now we have the opportunity to have these next gen PLC. Well, we could decouple a skid. You go put that, you go get that skid on its own PLC, publishing to a broker that sits in the control room over fiber, well, now you start to see a path forward to like, okay, we can have a very small micro outage of this one skid while we get it tested, validated, get it cut over, bring the new MQTT data into your HMI, then you go to the next skid, have another micro outage. Well, now before you know it, you have migrated your entire plant, and you're decoupled so that if you lose any one unit out of that plant, you're not losing the entire unit. I think that's where I think we're going to have to go as an industry if we're going to tackle this legacy PLC issue.
And to some degree, you're talking about, what we've seen in DCSs over the decades, right? This notion of taking processing power and spreading it around, right? Because we have available CPU, we have available RAM, we have available tools now to do just that. And that's to reduce reliance on a single point of failure, to distribute tasks to the point to where it's best suited. Think of a PID loop, something very simple, very common in process control, right? You could do the PID solving in the PLC. We see it all the time. But what if you could take that PID algorithm and actually have that execute at the IO points where the control output and the process variable are, and pass it to set point? That's a notion that was always left to DCS type applications. But today we can do that with these next gen PLCs. We can actually spread that notion of logic solving around the system. And I think that's we've been doing that obviously for decades, but there's a lot of other companies that are doing that now as well. And I think that in terms of resiliency, which you brought up earlier, I think that's right on the money.
You ever hear that story about the daughter and the mother at Thanksgiving? They're making the ham.
They don't make hams at Thanksgiving, Alan. Those are turkeys.
No. You make ham too, just so you know. Here's the point. The mother was getting the ham out and getting it ready, and she lopped off both ends of the ham, and she put the ham in the oven. And her daughter was watching her saying, "Mom, how come you cut the ends of the ham off before you cook it?" And she says, "Oh, I actually don't know. Let's call your grandmother and find out, because that's the way she taught me." They call the grandmother. The grandmother answers. The daughter says, "Hey, why did we cut off the ends of the ham?" And the mother says, "Because the oven was too small. We had to cut the ends of the ham off." But years later, with these new technology, we're still cutting off the ends of the ham, right? That is how we are at where we're at today, because trying to think that kind of outside the box and think about decoupling and moving this technology out to the edge is so foreign to what we've all done and been taught that it's not comfortable, and it seems like it's risky. In reality, I think it's just a matter of the validation and the testing, because I think the technology is ready to do it. We just got to move in that direction, in my opinion.
Agreed. And once the benefit starts to outweigh that challenge, is when we see critical mass and when we flip over. And I think that's really where we're starting to see that progression happen. Is people are saying, "Wow, this is a real benefit." So it makes sense to invest in this idea and learn it and apply it and solve these problems.
Ben, you were getting ready to weigh in.
Yeah, Alan and Dave and to some extent Benson have sort of touched on a little bit, and I just want to try and verbalize it a little bit and maybe steer this conversation in Node Red. But something that you've all sort of touched on is all this training and decades and years. I'm involved in the Opto training here class, and one thing that I see is a younger generation coming through. And if you just get an Allen Bradley PLC, throw it at them, say, "Turn this on, power it up, make it sing," they're like, "What?" But if you put a Raspberry Pi or a dual booting laptop that boots Windows Linux in front of them, they go, "Oh, right, okay." So what we can do is we can utilize this younger generation that have been trained in Ethernet. They don't know what Modbus is necessarily, but they know what Ethernet is. They know what Cat5 is. They know what Wi-Fi is. They've got all the base layer skills that a soft PLC capitalizes on what Benson was saying. Why do we use Linux? Because most of the world runs on Linux. That's what students are learning. That's what the next generation of industrial automation engineers are going to come through and use. So we can sort of kickstart and leverage all of this incredible university and college and trade schools, all this training of comfort around the technology that we all have been using and need to use. It jumpstarts so much of that. Yeah, we still, to Alan's point, well, you pick your PLC, you pick your pain, and you get to know it. But wow, what a leg up when a soft PLC has this base layer of fresh college graduates that can just get up and running. So I don't want to segue here, Jeff, so pull the reins if necessary. But one thing we're definitely seeing is when you mention MQTT or Node-RED, just about every college student, oh yeah, I know what that is, or JavaScript. They're instantly, very close to instantly up to speed. And yeah, I use MQTT at home, or I've hooked it in with my Alexa or my Google Home or this or that, and I send data here or there, and I built a little web dashboard. Well, that sounds a little bit like an intro to a soft PLC.
Man, I'm just going to tell you, one of the things that we face in the OT space is the reality of, like, just you talking about Raspberry Pi, Node-RED, all those different things, right? People who've been in the OT industry for 30 years, your skin starts to, you start to get a little antsy, right? Why? Because, like, when you start to think about that plant that is producing, $1 million a day, and then it's like, oh, we've got this cool new technology, let's try it, right? You talk about getting a young engineer's hand slapped and like, you can't do that. We can't mess with this thing because it's so critical. It's got to stay up. And so we have got to find a path to be able to bring this young talent into this industry and get them to be excited about the opportunity to help it grow and transition. And yet we have to do it in a manner that doesn't impact these systems, right?
But you just said it, Alan.
Yeah.
You just said it. Don't let them rip out the $1 million PLC that's running right now. Put the soft PLC in front of it. Segment the young engineer from the money making, legacy PLC,
Exactly.
and let them play.
Yeah, most of the IoT applications or digitalization applications that I see, and probably all of us see, are monitoring applications first and foremost. And a lot of times they want the people installing them want them to be in parallel with the existing control setup. And therefore, it's kind of a lower risk. Yeah, you might lose some data if it didn't work out for whatever reason, but generally they're very reliable. But I think maybe a great way to get a comfort factor going with a constituency there, because they say, you know what, this thing's actually been up for 3 years, and I'm going back through my historian, and there's no missed data at all. It's very reliable.
Right.
And kind of get their feet wet that way. And then maybe the next project they do is say, well, I'm going to use this PLC as both a control engine as well as the digitalization, data gathering aspect. And that's what certainly the promise that these products that we're talking about today hold, by combining the traditional PLC and the Linux side both together in one box. And you can get some great cost savings over time if you do adopt that one piece of hardware rather than going to the two, which is
and by exposing them to the data, they start to understand the process, and they can then be trained and come up to speed. To Alan's point on the $1 million money making, don't touch it, it's fragile. It's sort of we've got a few people in the factory that understand it. Well, then you can start to do the knowledge transfer over time as they're monitoring, gaining insight to the data.
Hey, Terry.
To go back to Jeff's point, don't make them eat the ham, just the edges.
Terry and Steve, I want to ask you each. Terry, other than me, I think you're the youngest guy in this group. So
I had him in mind for some of this because we do have to team up occasionally. I've got some automation experience, but he's got some code skills. So Benson sort of keeps us close together so we can mind share.
Well, Terry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback on your mics, but I want to hear from you. Tell us a little bit, if you would. You do a ton of education at Opto, but you're also that next gen, and I'm probably making you younger than you are. Weigh in on what's been said? What's your perspective on this?
Well, I think to Alan and Ben's points, a lot of it really does come down to comfort. You know, what I'm comfortable with versus what Ben, Alan, Steve, etc. are comfortable with versus someone that's graduating next year versus someone that's been in the industry for 20 years. You know, it's not just the skills that we have, it's what our comfort level is applying those skills in a given space. So for something like Node-RED, that maybe makes Alan a little bit anxious, makes me very excited. And things like Linux, yeah, you know, in college, I got through all of my computer programming classes with a Chromebook that I had hacked Linux onto. You know, I got through college on a Linux operating system, and it worked great for everything I needed it to. So when I sat down at Opto and Benson's telling me about the Rio that's coming out, and I get one of the early units, I'm like, can I get into the shell on it? You know, like that was I just wanted to get in there and poke around, and that's something I'm comfortable with. But you know, if I wanted to poke in shell, you know, admin access on a production device, you know, so many people would just throw their hands up, throw me out of the building. They'd have none of it. So it's just what I'm comfortable with as a, you know, relatively new person to this field versus people that have been doing it for a long time. We do get somewhat stuck in our ways. And so there are things I would try to do with shell where Ben may have an easier way to do it with pack control or with CodeSys or what have you. So I really think this idea of comfort really is an important thing to consider when talking about these next generation PLCs and what we can do versus maybe what we should do. And there does need to be a meeting in the middle from the excited young folks. I'm going to throw myself into that camp. And then maybe some of the more experienced folks.
Well, that's why I loved this last workshop and was disappointed that I wasn't a part of it. But what I loved about it was we used the right tools for the right things, and we didn't cross those boundaries, right?
Mhm.
And that's, you know, I love having Node-RED in the PLCs. For instance, we have a project we're doing, and we've got a little PepLink LTE radio in the panel. Well, I can use Node-RED, go to the SNMP and strip out all that data and get the RSSI, put it right into my code. I can do all kinds of stuff with that. It's perfect, right?
Mhm.
What I don't want to do is I don't want to start running my plan off of Node-RED because I'm more comfortable coding in Node-RED than I am in CodeAssist or Pack Control, right? And that's where I get anxious when we start to get into a production space where it's like, oh, we could do all this cool stuff. Yes, we can, but the priority has to be we have to use the right tool for the right job and make sure that we're not, because we got to keep that resilience that comes in these next gen PLCs. So go ahead,
That's key.
Steve. Sorry,
Yeah,
man.
that's fine. Yeah, I think too that just, you know, the whole idea of working in tandem. So you can have, you know, you have the controls engineer minded guy, the ladder logic PLC programmer that's been at it for 20, 30 years. But you want to incorporate Node-RED. You get the, you know, the younger Linux minded guy in there and meet in the middle, like you said, like with an API, and pass that data there. That way, you're not endangering the controls engineer and his comfort, but you can take advantage of all this. And then the other point I wanted to bring up too with the DCS systems. And the distributed control, the whole concept of doing distributed control, but not being locked into that single vendor solution is I think very enticing to a lot of people now too. So
Part of it, I think, is going to play in our personal experiences, what we're doing outside of the workplace. right? Like in my house right now, I'm running 3 different home assistants as part of my home automation, because what would be my preference? My preference would be to run HomeKit, Apple HomeKit for everything. But the reality is that it's just not supported widely enough for me for that. So we've got a little bit of everything. I'm not going to say the names because I don't want things going off in my office right now. But please don't say the names. I'll mute you all. But at the end of the day, I can use if this, then that, and start really tying a lot of those things together, right? So it's a non-critical process, right? Where I'm using technology. I have to think that a lot of these, hey, Alan, the things that make your skin itch, right? Those areas that have uncomfortability. Well, we probably don't want to put that in the $1 million a day portfolio. But why not experiment with it in less critical processes and test its reliability over a long period of time?
I want to be real clear about this point. PLC Next and Opto 22, I have absolute confidence to put those pieces of hardware in any process that I would put any other hardware in, because they are a PLC. They're resilient. They're going to give me the uptime that I need, and they're going to give me a level of cybersecurity. I just got to make sure Terry is very restricted on his access to that piece of hardware.
I'm just trying to remember a college experience with having a laptop available to me. All right.
He's talking about the second youngest guy in the call. What are you talking about?
Apparently I'm not, but or that just makes the rest of you guys. You did. Am I the only one that did not have a laptop in college?
I didn't have a laptop.
I had to go to the lab. We couldn't even afford a PC. I mean, we're talking about 8088 processors back in the day, and even those were outside of the budget of a college student.
We got
to go to the lab to do all your work.
We were the first school. At least they told us we were the first school that got a computer with our tuition, and everybody had it. It was a Zenith Z100. That was a absolute paperweight by the end of 4 years, completely non-open and didn't work for anything other than holding down papers. By the time I graduated,
if we start down this rabbit hole, we're all going to be. Yeah. Terry still gives me a hard time about saving programs onto audio cassette.
Yeah.
But to Alan's point, it was actually something that Benson and I did in my lab, my evil lab here. We torture tested a Raspberry Pi, and one of the reasons we did that was because there was just a few people talking about Opto using a ARM processor in Epic, and they were like, well, what about thermal throttling? And we're like, well, let's have a look. And so we got the hairdryer and we got the Raspberry Pi. We ran some code, and sure enough, it hit. Benson, do you remember what temperature? It wasn't much.
It wasn't much. It was like 50 degrees C. And suddenly the performance of the Raspberry Pi just cratered.
Yeah.
And, when we're talking about running on PLC Next or Groove Epic, we've taken that into account. We're rated to 70 degrees C, and you will get the performance that you should be getting at 70 degrees C.
All the way up to 70.
It still does come down to the hardware. We're talking about decoupling and whatnot. But at the end of the day, wherever you're going to run, you're given choice of software, whether it's Node-RED, whether it's the real-time control engine, whatever. It does come down to where are you running at, and what can that hardware sustain in challenging environments where we all work in, right? Whether it's out in the field in the middle of Bakersfield to deep within the basement of a plant floor running a compressor, whatever it is, it's got to perform in those environments. And we both have a long history, as many other hardware manufacturers do, a long history of providing those types of products that are designed to run in those environments.
So it's not just the soft PLC, the notion itself. I mean, we've all sort of touched on this, and I just sort of wanted to clarify that is a soft PLC could run on just about anything, including a Raspberry Pi. That just because you can doesn't mean you should, or it's the wisest thing. So while we got young Terry, racing in from college, waving his Raspberry Pi, I'm going to change the world, and you got Alan saying, back off, don't touch it. And to Steve and Dave's point, it's like, there's a meeting in the middle. And I loved your API idea there, Steve, but also with hardware, you're like, okay, you can play with that at the lab. You can, Jeff, you can play with your Raspberry Pi at home, and we'll take the concepts, what you develop, what your proof of concept there. I was going to say cheap, but Raspberry Pis are not cheap anymore. And then, Benson, we've seen this, haven't we? A bunch of customers have sort of prototyped stuff in the lab on the Pi and then ported it, moved it over to Epic and to Rio, and to Alan's point, then put it into production.
Yep.
And the reason they did that, remember this too, we had a lot of people out there trying to do even control in Node-RED, for example. But this notion of running a bunch of Raspberry Pis out there and like, oh, they're cheap, $35 back in the day. If it fails, we'll just replace it. Well, they did fail, and they failed at an alarming rate. And suddenly this notion of going out and replacing the Raspberry Pi with another one and then another one, people got fed up and say, these are no longer reliable. So how do we take what we've done, this very cool application, whatever it may be, and run it on hardware that's designed to stand the test
industrial and years and years of lifetime and uptime. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, guys, is that a marketing? Is it just tough to try to get someone to realize there's a huge separation and difference between if they're hearing Linux, right? They're hearing from you, hey, Linux, and if they're thinking Raspberry Pi, is it just a messaging thing?
Well, let's think about those applications with the folks doing the stuff on the Raspberry Pi. They do come from, kind of Terry's domain, right? And so they have this brilliant idea, they have the software available, and they've got this commercially available hardware they can run it on. They don't come necessarily from the worlds that Alan and I and Steve and Dave came from. And that is that notion of this resilient hardware platform. They just see what they can do. And they're having to learn that process. We've got the scar tissue. These guys don't yet. And they're gaining that. And so we're seeing that transition starting to occur, people recognizing how important that hardware is.
Cool. Hey, question coming in from the our group online. First, Arnold says, "Don't eat the ham, just eat the edges." A new bumper sticker going on Alan's wide body. And he did not have a laptop at college either. Thank you. The Mr. Schultz, David Schultz, appreciates the shout out. David, thanks. He says, "What I found is the biggest obstacle to digital transformation or evolution is resistance to change. Mm-hmm. Change management, adoption, and acceleration are critical aspects for success. Using change as validation for not changing will become one of the primary drivers for companies to no longer exist."
Totally agree. 100%. And we deal with it all the time. And it's changed at multiple levels, but it does come down to that culture. And let's be honest, we're in a risk-averse environment for good reason. Mm-hmm. We don't want people to get hurt, right? And we want to make sure safety is paramount and performance is paramount. And so that's largely drives some of that resistance to change, but that change is now starting to permeate. And as Dave Schultz, so exquisitely stated there, if you're not considering change and considering using these new technologies, you're a dinosaur. You're not going to move on with the rest of the industry. But it takes time.
That's a good segue into Arnold's question. Did you see that one there, Jeff? Will ladder logic ever go away?
Say it again.
So, what's that?
Ask the question again.
Will ladder logic ever go away? And I think to Benson's point, I mean, never say never. We've audio cassettes, saving programs onto audio cassettes. We're going to be, C90, C15, we're going to be saving programs to audio cassette because nothing's better come along. Who remembers zip drives? Who remembers hole punching their floppy disks to flip it over and get double-sided disks? I think the answer, is ladder logic ever going to go away? Is the floppy disk ever going to go away? Because it hasn't. It's amazing the number of even Opto customers who shall remain nameless, who are still got, their legacy hardware and they're still backing up and saving on diskette.
Okay, but can't we argue that it has gone away? I mean, just because there's a few, right? But can't we say that it's gone away?
Well, I guess to what we're all sort of talking to without actually saying it. I mean, can I actually come out and say, yes, eventually
Sure.
ladder logic will be replaced this year, next year? No, of course not.
Yeah, here's the thing though. We're talking about these platforms as a result of last week's event. These platforms that have all these new capabilities, but they still run ladder.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be
Good
honest.
point.
The code
Code
system,
system.
Exactly right. Yeah.
IEC 61131, Dave Schultz puts it right in there. They says, Epic and Next are often viewed as niche products, but their core, they are IEC 61131 compliant devices. Indeed, they are. So you're not giving up something to move to these platforms. And I think that's a real key piece, is being able to pull the industry forward with these new technologies, but not necessarily leave technologies that they deeply care about or have spent a lot of time investing in how to learn to program in ladder or whatever. They're not having to leave that behind.
Exactly.
And I think that's an important concept that we tend to forget. It's not like we're ditching the old technology for the new. That's just not the case here.
Nope. Even if ladder is the ultimate truncated ham, when you think about
Right.
it. Because
Yeah.
the only reason it was ever there was because there was this interim part of time of Industry 2.0 where the relay did the logic.
Right.
But if that era had never occurred, I mean, a flow diagram is so much more intuitive to people.
Right.
And in fact, with steeplechase, that's what they programmed. It was a flow diagram. So
And same with pack control.
But man, we've all lived through it. People said, no, it's got to be ladder. And so, yeah, we're not fighting that. Neither of us. We're still incorporating ladder. It's as valid as anything else. If that's what people like, keep using it. If it endures for another 100 years, so be it.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. It works. Some people say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think that the trend clearly will be as younger people are being educated with these other tools like Node-RED, et cetera, that the logical flow will probably win out over time. But until it does, let's keep ladder going and not shun it.
You have to keep it going because, again, you have all this code out there that people need to reuse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cost savings and different things. But it will eventually go the same route as a floppy disk because of Terry, right? Because you're gonna have these younger kids who are coming into this industry that will, at the beginning, allow you to, okay, all right, we got to do ladder. But then they will eventually get to a place where they're in the senior leadership roles, and they're the ones that are going to be starting to make the decisions. And at the end of the day, we all know that ladder is only. What did I miss?
Terry's title.
Oh, killing ladder logic. Yes, but what is happening is I completely lost my train of thought.
One rung at a time.
That was what it was. It was the fact that ladder is not the best code base for a lot of what we have to do.
Right.
But we do it still because that's what we're used to doing. It's the cutting off the ham, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's shift. Node-RED. I'm curious to hear the kind of the aha moment at Opto headquarters, at Phoenix headquarters, where it was like, let's get Linux. Let's build this new PLC. Let's build this next gen PLC, and then let's do some really cool stuff. How did you get there as companies?
Yeah, it's a long story, but the short version is, it kind of comes back to what I was mentioning earlier. We wanted to do some new tasks, tackle new problems. In our case, it was our pack control, our flowchart based software running on our, snap pack controllers, which are essentially, old school processors with an RTOS, and of course our software running on there. And a lot of that just was, being able to communicate to another API or write data directly to a database without necessarily going through a Windows PC first, right? So a Windows PC collecting data from a controller and then making the injection into a database, or making a call to an API, or whatever the task was. And for us, we thought, we can run down to our engineers again saying, hey, we really need to be able to make an HTTP call. We really need to be able to make an ODBC call to a database. And indeed, they're like, yeah, put it on the list. We'll get to it. But this tool was available. This notion of an open source piece of software that made those types of tasks very, very easy to do. And then to integrate those back with the control system was really the moment where we said, our aha moment. And so in 2013, we launched a product, the first Groove product, which was a Linux-based piece of hardware that ran both Node-RED and an HMI and a couple of other things. And we started to really find, that we were unleashed. We could do all kinds of interesting tasks that we no longer had to rely on a Windows PC for. And that was really kind of the key thing that happened for us. And the fact that when we were trying to learn this software, Node-RED's pretty simple to get started with, but you can do some pretty complex tasks as well. And it's all based on this notion of JavaScript. So if you think about, if I want to reach out onto the internet and learn something about ladder logic, I've got some pretty finite resources available for that. But if I wanted to learn JavaScript, wow, was there a treasure trove of information and training and help out there. And we thought that was a really important aspect of rolling this notion of Node-RED into, basically an industrial device. So I think there's a lot of things that happen. I mean, you look at Groove Epic today, and we launched it in 2018, and everybody's, it's a niche product. It's new to the market. But we've been, Ben and I in the Skunk Works worked on these concepts starting in 2009. And some of that it was even, just trying to get data to a mobile device. And so, it's like any rock star, you mentioned that, like, oh, you're an overnight success. And he goes, no, I wasn't. I've been doing this for 15, 20 years. Right. So you don't necessarily see that, but there's a lot of effort that went into making this work. And if I can hold the line for one more point, and I'm going to address the clickbait title. Why would you connect a PLC to the internet? The thing we have to remember is this: we keep talking about cybersecurity. We keep talking about how we're going to do this in a safe manner. Remember that.
Hey, Benson, I want to capture the soundbite, shameless here, but do me a favor. Loop back. Ask the question and you can go.
Ask the question. Oh, you mean about your clickbait title?
Yeah.
So, that's this notion of, why would you ever connect a PLC to the internet? That's a bit of a misnomer, because when we're talking about these types of technologies, it's a multi-domain controller. And by that, I mean, you've got the control domain, you've got this notion of data exchange domain, you've got the data transport domain relative to MQTT or perhaps even OPC. And these are all running on a given piece of hardware. And so when you think about connecting a PLC to the internet, it's really not connecting directly to the internet, for one. But two, each of these different pieces of software run in their own domain on the hardware platform, meaning they're protected, they're sandboxed. So just because I have Node-RED communicating to a web service API to pull back the data, that's not necessarily creating a vulnerability for my control program. And these technology, these platforms, these technologies with Linux and so on, that's all embedded into the device, this notion of security, this notion of sandboxing. So you can do this in a very protected way. It's no different than when you're on your laptop at home and you're making a connection to google.com over an HTTPS connection and, doing a search on, cat toys. It doesn't mean that the entire internet now has access to your laptop, because it's going through, a router. It's got its own firewall. It's going through an ISP before it actually makes a connection to the internet, and so on. And then with these types of tools, not only are each of these pieces of software essentially sandboxed, but we're not allowing outside access back into the device. And I think that's a critical element that a lot of people don't understand. We throw these terms out commonly. It's all outbound. There's no inbound ports. But let's be honest, not everybody understands that. At the end of the day, it's being able to make a call out, but not necessarily, no way for somebody to make a call into you. You can talk out, but block all incoming traffic. But once I've made that call out, if I call you, Jeff, in Arkansas, I've got a connection. Now we can have a communication back and forth.
Yeah,
but
outbound doesn't mean that Jeff can't talk back to you.
It doesn't mean he can't talk back to me. But if I never give Jeff my number, there's no way he's ever going to be able to call me. Yep. And what's more is that number, in this case, an IP address, is behind several layers of protection anyway. Firewall there and a firewall on the device. So we have a lot of ways of protecting outside access coming into the device, but it doesn't mean that we can't communicate out. And I think that's, one of the questions we had on last week's event is like, well, if it's connected to the internet, I'm completely vulnerable. It's
Right.
just not the case.
Right.
Back to the Node-RED question, the origin and genesis of that within our products. I don't know the full answer to it, but I would not be surprised if it didn't necessarily just come from the market demanding it, but also when we get back to the younger generation of people who are now working on code for us, and they're familiar with GitHub and other repositories, and they say, wait a minute, there's all this open source stuff, license-free stuff out there, MIT, Oasis, whatever there might be. These are great tools. These are fantastic tools that we like to use in development. So why don't we just give our customers that power and that flexibility as well? So I think as we tap into this brave new world of Industry 4.0 / industrial Internet of Things and Internet of Things in general, what you do is you just there's X number of controls engineers out there. There's 100 or 1,000 times X programmers out there in different domains. And if we can tap into that power, which we clearly have with things like Node-RED, that's going to happen. And it's because there's a real benefit to it. It's a kind of a shortcut way to get more of a layman or a controls engineer with no kind of traditional coding background to be able to leverage JavaScript, in a very simple way, to just greatly expand the flexibility and number of different things they can talk to and do with very little effort. So I don't even know that we listen to the market to hear that demand, or if we just kind of like our developers said, hey man, this stuff's cool. Let's put it in there. I honestly don't know the answer. Steve, I don't know if you have any more background or visibility into how we came about.
Yeah, I don't, I think a lot of it, with PLC Next, it was driven as well more with higher level languages, C++, C Sharp, and having that global data space or environment between the compiled code and the PLC code. I think that's kind of the direction when PLC Next was first envisioned. Node-RED and scripting, I think, were part of it, but as Dave mentioned, the availability as we launched the product, the availability to these other options really, made light and were driven that direction as well.
Yeah, and getting back to the point of the right tool for the job, sometimes Node-RED's the right tool for the job, and sometimes something like Python might be a better tool.
Oh, absolutely.
For the particular job. And so, there's that flexibility as well. Once you get it into this open world, you can start saying, let's truly look at the best tools for whatever job we're trying to do.
Exactly.
And Node-RED is that tool oftentimes, but sometimes something like Python might be more efficient at running something. And I think a lot of AI and ML are built more on Python. So, there's a whole world out there, and it might sound intimidating to the controls engineer who's been doing ladder logic, but there's a lot of resources out there, as you guys have referenced, to really learn a lot of these other concepts. And by the way, in our environments with the Opto 22 environment, as well as ours, you can have 2 or 3 people working on a project at the same time, some working in ladder, some working in these higher level languages, doing different aspects, and then coming together on common ground. So it shouldn't be an intimidating thing. It should be an exciting thing. But just know that with both these platforms, you can stay within your domain of comfort and expertise and get a job done, but it can be extended beyond that.
And I'll go one step further, and that's an excellent point, Dave. We had a customer, a large OEM, in the refrigeration business, and they started off with pack control running on older platforms. Then they moved to CodeSys, and then they're like, we just need a little bit more functionality. Then they went to C. Now they're running their C Sharp application, in our case, right on the Epic. But it's that notion that they could move from one programming environment, programming domain to the next, depending on what they were trying to accomplish. And to have those kind of tools available to you, I think is critical. I mean, they didn't have to, if you buy a PLC and it doesn't meet the task, whatever PLC it might be, you go out and buy another PLC or another programming language, to be able to stay with one piece of hardware and start, evolving your application all on that platform because it was open from the outset. That gave them an incredible leg up, and now they're way ahead of any of the other folks that they compete with. And it's running in C. So, if you want to run in ladder, terrific. You want to write a Python program, you want to write a C# program, you want to use flowchart. Those are the kinds of choices I think that are important that people want today, and not to be locked in.
Flexibility.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Choices, options. All right. Question that's just been burning in the back of my mind. Ben, I'm going to spotlight you. You ready? Here it comes. You've got a poster over your shoulder.
Yeah, this
that poster, nicely framed, I might mention, with some really professional tacking strips in the corner.
that's right.
I like that. What's up with the deep sea challenge? Are you a big Titanic fan?
No, not really. So, unbeknownst to Opto, back in late 2011, James Cameron decided to get a team together to build a submersible to go back to Marianas Trench. It hadn't been down since the 60s, in a bath escape, which was a gasoline-filled ballast, big cannonball, basically. And he said, "I'm going to go back and do it right." And they, again, unbeknownst to Opto, they selected Opto 22 as the PLC control system for the submersible. They had some challenges because this is like out of the box stuff here. So they rang the factory and said, "We need some help, but we're not going to tell you anything until you sign this very thick NDA." So the management here signed the NDA. Turns out it was James Cameron building a submersible in Australia, and they wanted somebody from the factory to go down to Australia and help them out for 2 weeks. Weirdly, I don't know why, somehow I drew the short straw, and I got dispatched down to Australia for 2 weeks. 2 weeks turned into 4 months, working in a warehouse, ended up 3 months at sea. And so I got very heavily involved. And so I went and saw the movie. I was the only one that paid the ticket price. It didn't do quite as well as they were hoping. And I got the movie billboard. I said, "Hey, can I have that?" And they took it out, rolled it up. And I sort of stuck it up on my wall here just as a reminder of some of the fun stuff that you can get caught up into every now and then. So that's the very quick version there.
And
Jeff,
the premise was
you're in
that
the movie,
nobody.
right?
Yeah, of course he's in the movie.
But many times I'm one of actually the few guys that's in the credit twice, because after I was on board helping there, we actually recreated some of the footage up at James Cameron's ranch up here in mid-California. And so my name is also in those credits. So they're in the credits at the main expedition, and then they're in the recreation credits as well. So,
But I thought there was an Opto 22 wetsuit in the movie.
That's a whole nother story.
yeah, that's.
But in the premise, the whole thing was that James Cameron really wanted to break the world's record for the deepest solo dive in the deepest part of the world's oceans, and he did. He did it. April of 2012.
Yeah.
And the only hardware that could get it done was PLC Next and Opto, but PLC Next wasn't quite ready.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool, Ben.
It's a bit of crazy fun.
So guys, what's as we start to think about wrapping on the rundown, what's the future? Like what's the
hang on. Are we actually gonna be rapping? Is this like gonna be a rap contest? Or are we
I hope not.
You go first.
We were intimidated by the dad jokes, let alone having a rap.
Yeah. By the way, your dad joke debt is still quite high right now at this point.
Mine?
All of you. We're as we start thinking about rapping, I am curious to hear kind of, what's coming down the pipe. What's the new technology that nobody's even talking about yet that we need to be paying attention to? What's the immediate future looking like?
Don't forget you're on mute, Terry. There we go.
Well, I mean, I'm just gonna say I want to see more programming. Happy to be the murderer of ladder logic. I want to see some more Python. A lot of people are learning Python and JavaScript and these other sort of more modern programming techniques, and as much as flowcharts are incredibly powerful, they're easy to read, easy to convey the idea and the functionality behind the program. A lot of people are still learning how to write code line by line. And I find that it is extremely powerful. And when you do get past that learning curve, you can throw together some extremely complicated programs very, very quickly and very efficiently. And I'd love to see more of that. But largely, I'm doing what we do here at Opto. So maybe Benson, looking at the horizon, can speak more to what may be coming. But personally, as that college graduate, that's what I'm excited to see. I've seen it in a lot of our customers' projects. People are starting to put together these Linux shell programs and running them on our hardware and on other hardware that's communicating with different I/O points. And it's just amazing what you can do with that stuff. So I'd love to see more of that, and we're starting to. But yeah, I'm not going to speak to what's on the horizon because I'm more than a lot bit biased.
Well,
I'll go there a little bit because Terry spoke of Python, and I'm certainly keeping my eye on. There is a lot of very, very interesting and powerful Python libraries for edge machine learning. So very, very compact machine learning libraries that are specifically deployed on the edge, where a lot of us are putting these soft PLCs. So I think Terry's sort of on the right track there. I think Python machine learning is something that's coming.
Yeah, I think the future is very bright. I mean, Dave said it in last week. They started with a clean slate, right? They kind of threw everything out and said, let's start fresh. What is this going to look like? And Opto did, of course, the same thing. And the reason for that is to create fundamentally a platform that does permit true growth. This notion of a future system, even though we started with just a Linux platform, getting a real-time engine, control engine to run on there, that was kind of the this notion of an MVP or Rev 1. Hey, it's out there, it'll do everything a traditional PLC does. But now we can, the future is so bright. There's so many things that we can do that because of those fundamentals, this notion of edge and so on. I mean, if you look at the Epic when it came out, and the same thing with PLC Next, in 2018, we delivered a piece of hardware to the market. Today in 2022, almost 2023, 5 years later, you can download a version of our firmware and put it on that same platform, the same Epic that was launched in 2018, and get arguably 2-3x the capabilities from that same piece of hardware. And I think that's the future. Is it? We don't know what it is. None of us have, the ability to see into the future. But what we know is that we now have a platform for that kind of growth. And by, we've heard the term software is eating the world. Indeed, it is. That software running on those kinds of platforms are going to provide new levels of capability we haven't even thought of yet. Right. It's the guys like Terry, it's the guys like Steve that are going to say, hey, well, I think I want to do this. This sounds like it'd be kind of interesting. Can I do it? And the answer is yes. So I think that's kind of where the future is, and getting back to your core question.
Yeah, I think at a macro level, the big picture level, I think in the future, a controls engineer or whoever is occupying that kind of a role will not even think about trying to replicate some low value add code, like they would have had to do for the last 20, 30 years. Oh, I'm going to build this module. Well, it's already been done. It's open source somewhere. I'm just going to download that. And then I'm going to focus on whatever high value add that I can do to make this the secret sauce for my application. So I think a lot of the easy stuff will be already done, canned, reusable, and open source. And then it'll free people up to just say, I'm going to spend my limited time resource on doing something high impact for this application. And so you get some better outcomes that way. And then if they are so inclined, they can put that back in the open source community. If they're not, they can keep it, and it'll be their IP that they have for their company themselves.
It comes down to tools on platforms, right?
Yeah.
All right, guys. Wrapping it. It's joke time. Benson, you're always killer. You've always got something in the back pocket. I'll give you a second to pull it out. Have you ever noticed that horse memes, you never see their teeth?
Of course.
Yeah. Well, you never look a gift horse in the mouth.
And did you hear about the stationery store that's moving? I was very frustrated when I found out.
So my wife's planning Thanksgiving dinner, and she's looking for a turkey with no legs, and she's like, "Where would I find those?" And I said, "The last place you left it."
I guarantee you she's not looking for a ham.
Well, it's been a long time we've been on this call. I've been drinking a lot of water, so I'll tell this joke that's sort of related to that. Why is it you cannot hear a pterodactyl go to the bathroom?
Oh, because the P is silent.
Bam!
Nice. Oh,
My wife got overheated last night, and she asked me to blow on her. I'm not a fan.
did you hear about the CEO who is 5'2" tall? Small business owner.
Leading up to this Halloween, we were trying to save all the candy for the kids that would come by, but my fiance noticed I just kept eating all this candy, and she's like, "Where are you getting all this chocolate?" So I just turned to her and I was like, I've got a couple of Twix up my sleeve.
Well done.
All right. Well, I'm not gonna. Steve's already telling me no. Ben sent me. I'll just read the joke that Ben sent me in chat. He didn't want to read it out loud. And listen, you're gonna have to think on this for quite a long time before it's gonna sink in. Maybe on December 7th on our next virtual workshop, I'll check back and see if you got it. Why Ben wants to know why is Michael Jackson's voice, or was his voice, so high pitched? It was because of all the hee. Not gonna get it. You're not gonna get it. You're gonna have to think about it.
I got it. HE.
The HE. Well done. All right. That wraps this rundown. Hey, to our guests, thank you so much. Opto, Phoenix. Alan and I are so appreciative of the fact that the way that you are collaborating, cooperating, and what a great spirit for this community. Thank you for being here. And to our audience, thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. We're hoping that we're serving you content that you appreciate, and we will talk to you here soon at integratelive.com. Have a great one.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks, everybody.